All, this is Dr. Mobeen Sayed from drbeen.com. Welcome to one more show. So I wanted to go over the same study, but this time about a little more detail about the method that they used. What did they mean by symptomatic hospitalized versus not symptomatic hospitalized? And then the data overall summary that we saw last time as well. Plus, I wanted to dig a little deeper in the vaccinated folks and the outcomes for them, which I am part of the vaccinated folks, and the outcome, it was not very fun outcome, but still a lot of protection there. So let's look at this data as well. DDS says, surprise, it's been time. I just wanted to make sure this is the data I had been digging for some days about uh, unvaccinated individuals and their risk, and not to scare them or something. I had been given this comment again and again that, hey, we would like you to tell us more. So finally, I had some more data right here from California, and Berkeley is involved. CDC is involved or not, doesn't matter. Berkeley is involved. It's a good analysis, and I wanted to make sure that we can bring it to us. I have a different plan for the 6 o'clock lecture, so I thought I'll do them earlier. So I hope that explains my situation. Rajesh, thank you very much. Yes, this is a normal behavior of the system. I feel bad for those who had been kind of promoting that we'll become worse and worse and worse, and still are continuing with their mantra and kind of trying to scare, and all kinds, the media agencies, some fear mongers, they just want to keep doing this. Luis Grande says, I am agreeing more and more with your COVID-3 hypothesis. Um, me too. All right, so let's start our discussion. So once again, the same study. This is the drbeen.com. This is the study. So I'm going to go over this part. This is a good article as well. It is in the description, the link. California hospitals find that Omicron causes fewer hospitalizations and shorter stays. Then this is the data that I showed last time as well. I'm going to look at a different part of this data now. This is Gupta lab. So if somebody is interested in how the Omicron's pathology is different from Delta and why it is milder, you can look at Gupta lab's work. And this is the Hong Kong University, Medical University, and their work. And that will be interesting as well. I'm sure that there are much more reasons, but at least we have this much that we know. Okay, so let's start our discussion. So once again, the summary should be in front of us, and then we'll dig deeper in the data. This summary is sufficient for you to look at and say, okay, I understand what is going on, and you can disengage from there. So summary is this. This is a study from California, Berkeley, Kaiser Permanente. The situation for most of these patients is going to be the same. The protection in the community, vaccination rate, previous infection and protection, mostly that is going to be the same demographic. There were about 53,000 patients who were identified as Omicron. There were about 17,000 patients that were identified as Delta. At this time, I think in most of the US and similarly in California, there is a mixture of Delta and Omicron. This is why it is very important to keep yourself safe. We don't know, will we end up getting Delta or Omicron? I would like Delta to go away fully before any chances of the infection. Here is the data. Data is this: hospital admissions, 1.3% of the Delta cases and 0.5% of the Omicron cases. So that already, if it was 1.5, then that's about 3 times reduction in hospitalization. Remember that we have a community. Then from the community, there are some people who get sick and stay outside the hospital and become okay at home. Then some end up in the hospital for saying, hey, something is going on. Some of them are just looked at in the hospital outpatient, and then they're sent back home that, hey, you're okay, or wait more. As you know, I'm not a fan of wait more, but still, that is what is happening. And then some of them will be admitted to say, we need to observe you and we need to start managing you. And then some of them, unfortunately, can end up in ICU. And then some of them, unfortunately, sadly, may die as well. There is no verified pointer for who will die or become severe. Any of us can be. This is why it is important to keep ourselves safe. Now, back here, Omicron's hospitalization is almost 1/3 of Delta caused hospitalization. So, first difference. Second, if a patient is in the hospital, then Delta caused, if Delta brings in one person in the hospital, or sorry, from hospital to ICU, then 0.26 of Omicron will go to ICU. That means for 4 people with Delta going from hospital ward to ICU, almost one or lesser will go from Omicron ward to ICU. So another 25% only, or 26%. Mortality, at least in this cohort, 70,000 patients, there were 14 mortalities in the 17,000 Delta cases and 1 mortality in 53,000 Omicron cases. The difference or efficacy is difference is 0.09 times Omicron's mortality compared to Delta. Very, very reduced. Mechanical ventilation, Delta 11 out of 17,000. And out of those 17,000, 222 got admitted. Then out of those, there were some that went into ICU, and then 11 ended up on ventilators. In Omicron, out of 53,000, 235 were in the hospital and 0 were ventilated. Hospital stay was shorter, 70% reduction in stay. So that is a summary. Shows you that there is a reduction, and this is common across the board: vaccinated, unvaccinated, previously infected, not previously infected. So we can't come in and say, well, the vaccinations did this, or not vaccination did this, or previous infection did it, or immune naivety did it. There is a contribution of all of those things plus the virus itself. Of course, immune naivety doesn't have a contribution, but virus itself as well. So with this now, I wanted to show the data from this other side now, vaccines. So let's start that part. First of all, if you read here, hospitalizations and ICU admissions were considered to be COVID-19 related if they occurred between 7 days before to 28 days after the date of each patient's positive SARS-CoV-2 test. So somebody is in the hospital, but the test is not yet done, or result is not there, or they didn't think of testing yet. So if they become positive today while admitted, and within the 7 days of their admission, they became positive, then they are considered positive. Similarly, 28 days after the date of being positive. So that is the hospitalization or ICU admission SARS-CoV-2 positive definition. Symptomatic hospital admissions were those with acute respiratory infection symptoms beginning on or 14 or lesser days before the admission date. So somebody is admitted, but they may have, up to 14 days earlier, they may have respiratory symptoms, then they are considered as symptomatic patient. Then we considered new onset respiratory symptoms following a positive test as a secondary endpoint for further exploratory analysis among cases who are asymptomatic all the time of their original test. So it's just some definitions. And then they say last, for a duration of hospital stay analysis. So duration of hospital stay. We recorded dates of discharge, in-hospital mortality, or censoring for all hospitalized patients. Patients who died in hospital or were discharged to hospice were considered to have experienced fatal COVID-19 hospitalization, while patients discharged for any other reason were considered to have experienced non-fatal COVID-19 hospitalization. So these are their definitions of symptomatic, asymptomatic, hospitalized, ICU, fatal, non-fatal. Now, let's look at the data. So I'm going to go to the conclusion we have already seen. Let me just quickly read the conclusion for the completion's sake. So if I go here and look at this, so here is their observation and then conclusion. So results. Our analysis included 52,297 cases of Omicron and 16,982 of the Delta infections. Hospital admissions occurred among 0.5% of Omicron and 1.3% of Delta. Among cases first tested in outpatient settings and adjusted hazard ratio for any subsequent hospital admission and symptomatic hospital admission associated with Omicron variant infection were 0.48 and 0.47 respectively, so lower. Rates of ICU admission and mortality after an outpatient positive test was 0.26 and 0.09 fold as high, so really low, as high among cases with Omicron variant infection compared to Delta. So if one person had Delta related ICU, then 0.09, one person had Delta related mortality, then 0.09 on the Omicron. If 1% had Delta related ICU admission, then 0.26 for Omicron. And similarly, they talk about the median duration as well. Conclusion: during a period with mixed Delta and Omicron variant circulation, SARS-CoV-2 infections with presumed Omicron variant infections were associated with substantially reduced risk of severe clinical endpoints and shorter duration of hospital stay. That is the conclusion. Now I'm going to look at some data with you. So this is the table 1. Association of SGTF, S gene target failure, or Omicron, with adverse clinical outcomes. So Omicron and what kind of adverse clinical outcomes does it do? That is table 1. So any hospital admission, cases tested in outpatient setting, all cases. So here the first column, I hope it is big enough. The first column, so this is cumulative events. First column is Delta. The second column is Omicron. So Delta, all cases tested in outpatient setting and then admitted. 11.2% were admitted for Delta. 1.7% were admitted for Omicron. And you can actually see other cases as well. Symptomatic hospital admission. So symptomatic is even before they came to hospital and got tested positive, up to 14 days before they had respiratory infection symptoms. And once again, Delta, 11%. Is that percent or per thousand? These are per thousand. So apologies. 11 per thousand versus Omicron 1.6 per thousand. ICU admission 1.4 per thousand versus 0.1 per thousand. 0.1 for Omicron, 1.4 for Delta. Mechanical ventilation, there were 11 folks ventilated, 0.6 per thousand, and nobody ventilated on the Omicron side. Deaths, if you see here, 14, so 0.8 per thousand versus 1, lesser than 0.1 per thousand. So really good data. So there is a question, somebody is saying, that is a great question. Where is the great question? I want to see the great question. MGW, are they still seeing the blood clots and myocarditis, etc. with Omicron? So I haven't yet seen, this data doesn't show those progressions within the hospital. So I'm digging for that. As soon as I get it, I'll discuss it. Thomas, welcome. Okay, so continuing. Hey, roller girl is here. Hey. Okay, back here. Sorry to become distracted. Continuing with the data. So that is the adverse actions, and you can see that many folds reduced adverse reactions or outcomes. That may be hospitalization or ICU or death or ventilation. Now, the second one, this one is the table 2, that is demographic and clinical characteristics of cases tested in outpatient with Omicron or Delta infections. So, outpatient patients were tested and they end up either being Delta or Omicron. What are their clinical characteristics and what are their demographic characteristics? This is that table, and it's a beautiful table, lots of data in here. So I would request you to open up this PDF, look for your age and your characteristics, and then see what kind of risk is in here. And you can actually see some risks are very interesting. For example, I looked at Asian for myself, and look at this. Asian, Delta, is that the percentage? Yes, so percentage. 7% risk of infection. Asian. Omicron, 11.4% risk of infection. So Omicron is hitting Asians more. And similarly, if you see here, white, non-Hispanics, 31 were with Delta and 24% with Omicron. Black, non-Hispanic, 6.6% infection, or 6.6% of all infected were Blacks, non-Hispanics, while 8.8% with the Omicron. Look at Hispanics, 6.6% of Delta versus 45.8% of Omicron. So my point is this table has a lot of very interesting data in here. I am focusing on overall summary. I'm focusing on vaccinated, unvaccinated, because that is the cohorts that had been asking for the data. And once again, I don't take side. So I know that there is a lot of desire in some folks to say you got to take a side. I cannot take a side. I'm providing this data. This data itself is not taking a side. It is presenting data. Okay, so continuing. Look at the income-based, smoking-based. Never smoker, Delta 80%, and Omicron 82%. Current smoker, Delta 4.4, Omicron 4.2, slightly less. Former smoker, almost the same. Then weight, underweight, Delta 11%, Omicron less, 7%. Normal weight, Delta 23, Omicron slightly more. I think that is just data's small fluctuations. Overweight, Delta 27%, 27.6, Omicron 29.1. So it is actually more. Obese, Delta 37.3 and Omicron 37.5. So someone who is not controlled on the weight side, for them there is no difference in Delta or Omicron. It's the same. The risk is the same. Infection rate is the same. Again, you know that hospital admissions were less in all cases. Deaths were only 1 compared to 14. And this is 1 out of 53,000. That is 14 out of 17,000. So even if there are folks who are falling in the categories that may not be well protected, they still have a less severe progression. Then let's see, prior infections, previously infected. So no documented previous infection. Delta, 99.7% of the patients were not previously infected. Omicron, 99%. Almost the same, right? One was almost 100%, one less. Documented previous infection. Somebody had been infected. 0.3% of the Delta cases were previously infected, 1%. So somebody was previously infected and recovered, almost 3 times more infections by Omicron compared to Delta. So efficacy of previous protection is less. Same thing, efficacy of the vaccine protection is less as well. And I showed you this one last time. So here I don't want to do it again, but if you see adenovirus 1 dose, interesting thing is this: if you see 1 dose, that has a better outcome, 2 doses different, and then 3 doses even different. And again, I don't think it is the doses themselves, it's also the demographic who are getting the 2 doses and 3 doses, who are more exposed probably for 3 doses. So there are more factors, but check this out. Messenger RNA vaccine, 1 dose. Delta, 2.9% of the patients. Out of 17,000, 2.9% were those patients who were 1 dose vaccinated. And they have a definition of 1 dose. Omicron, 2.8. So almost the same for 1 dose. 2 doses. Delta, 38.8%, and Omicron, 52.9%. So Delta's protection with the vaccines is better. Omicron's protection is lower. 3 doses, Delta 4.6, Omicron 13.4. So yes, there is protection better than 2 doses, but compared to Delta, Omicron's efficacy or vaccines protection against Omicron is less. Still a lot of protection here. So that is the vaccination. Let me see if there is. Modema Rose says yes, yes, yes. Okay. Okay, back here. I get distracted every so often. I'm going to continue to the tables. Okay, so table S2, onset of acute respiratory symptoms on or before dates of testing and hospital admission. So somebody who got admitted or tested today, the symptoms are there before or today. Delta, 80% of patients. Omicron, 79% of patients. Of course, they came to hospital. Cases tested in outpatient setting, onset or before testing. So again, similar numbers. Hospitalized cases, onset on or before hospital admission. 97% of Delta hospitalized had the symptoms started before. 77% had the symptoms started before. If Doug was here, he would say that this is a mouse that is making a noise like a duck. Okay, so this is the table S3, predictors of symptomatic hospital admission among cases with Delta and, sorry, SCTF is Omicron, non-SCTF is Delta. So predictors of symptomatic hospital admission among these cases. So meaning, what are the various variables? For example, age. Per 1 year increase, as the age increases for each year, then the 1.05, is that the percentage? All cases tested 1.05 more than the previous. Male versus female. If you take female as a reference, whatever number of the cases in female in Delta and Omicron, males were 1.26 times more in Delta and 1.05 times more in Omicron. So Omicron is similarly affecting male and female, while Delta is affecting lesser females and more males. Ethnicity. If you take whites and the infection in them as a reference, then in case of Delta, black 1.1 time compared to whites, and Omicron 1.38 times. Then if you look at Hispanics, 1.59 Delta, 1.55 times Omicron. Asian Pacific Islanders, 2 times compared to whites with Delta, and 1.4. And other mixed races, 0.62 and 0.88. So again, interesting data. Lots of good data here. Vaccination. If you take the infections in the unvaccinated as standard infection occurring in a society where there is no protection, if you take that as a reference, then various vaccines and their doses have different numbers. So for example, Delta, 1 dose Johnson & Johnson compared to unvaccinated, 0.24 times, so 24%. 2 doses of Johnson & Johnson, 0.37. Messenger RNAs, 1 dose, 0.22. 2 doses, 0.19. 3 doses, 0.15. So Delta has reduced, has better protection. The vaccines have better protection against Delta. Now look at the Omicron. 1 dose of Johnson & Johnson, 0.34. 2 doses, 0.58% compared to the non-vaccinated. So less protection. Then 1 dose of messenger RNA, 0.38, 2 doses, 0.35, 3 doses, 0.30. So not a lot of difference. So somebody who got 1 dose, then got another dose, then got another dose, there's not a lot of there is a difference from unvaccinated. But then within the doses, there is not a lot of difference. So you can actually see the adjusted ones, which are more interesting, because adjusted is where they have adjusted for all the variables and matched the cohorts and then looked at them. Okay, so I want to continue. Association of Omicron infection status with symptomatic hospitalization. So once again, you can see various ages. So let's see how the age factor, cases tested in outpatient setting, age 0 to 17, Delta, 1.5% of all the cases are 0 to 17. Omicron, 0.3% of all the cases. Is that percent or per thousand? That is per thousand. I hated that some places there is percentages and some it is thousand. So of course it depends upon the data size. So anyways, so my apologies, not percent, but per thousand. So 0 to 17, Delta, 1.5 cases per thousand. Omicron, 0.3, almost 5 times lesser. 18 to 39, 6.4 cases per thousand versus Omicron, 1.7 per thousand, almost 3 times less. 40 to 64, I fall in this bracket. Delta, 16.2 per thousand. Omicron, 1.4 per thousand, even lesser than 18 to 39. And that may have been vaccine and those things that are more prevalent in higher ages. 65 and greater, Delta 40%, 40.7% versus Omicron 5.8%. Huge difference. 40 versus 5.8. Look at sex. Female, 9.7 per thousand. If I keep saying percentage, please forgive me, it is per thousand here. 9.7 per thousand with Delta and 1.7 per thousand with Omicron. 9.10 and 2, 5 times less. Males, 12.7 and 1.5. I love this. Previous infection, not documented. Delta, 11 per thousand were previously infected but not documented. And Omicron, 1.6. Documented previous infection, those who could prove it. Delta, 23.3 per thousand had proven previous infection. Omicron, 2.0. This may be really not related to the previous infection, but mostly the duration of the infection, because we see that previous infection is actually less protective from Omicron. Vaccination status. We saw that before as well. Unvaccinated, Delta 16.3, Omicron 2.2. Almost 8 times reduction. One dose 8.4, Omicron 0.9, Delta 8.4, Omicron 0.9, almost 8 times less. Two doses 5.3 per thousand to 1.3 per thousand, 5 times. Three doses 7.6 per thousand to 1.9 per thousand. I would actually read it vertically to say, in, for example, let's say Omicron. In unvaccinated folks, there are 2.2 cases per thousand of Omicron. In vaccinated with one dose, 0.9. Vaccinated with two doses, 1.3 per thousand. Vaccinated with three doses, 1.9 per thousand, almost 2, which is coming very close to unvaccinated. Age. So once again, you have that data over here, and we can go from there. Table S5, association of Omicron infection status with adverse clinical outcomes, hospitalizations, ICU, ventilation, death. And we saw that data before as well. So I'm going to leave this, just give you a cumulative idea. Once again, it is per thousand. So if I say percentage, forgive me. Any hospital admission, cases tested in outpatient settings, and then all cases. So cases tested in outpatient settings, Delta 11.6 per thousand, Omicron 1.7 per thousand. All cases 13.4 per thousand, 4.6. But look at this, hospital admissions. Those who were tested in outpatient, out of them, in Delta's case, 11.5 per thousand were admitted. In Omicron's case, 1.6 per thousand were admitted. ICU admission. So now they're admitted. Are they going to progress to ICU? In case of Delta, if they were tested in outpatient because they had symptoms and the doctor said, well, I need to test you, or they tested them as a routine exam. If they were tested in outpatient, then got admitted, then are going to be in the ICU, what does that rate look like? 1.4 per thousand for Delta, 0.1 per thousand for Omicron, ICU admission. Mechanical ventilation, you saw that the Omicron didn't have any. Delta has 0.7 per thousand. Deaths. Delta had 0.8 deaths per thousand, and Omicron had lesser than 0.1 per thousand. There were 14 deaths out of 17,000 Delta infections, and there was one death out of 53,000 Omicron infections. And I think that is what we have. So this is the occurrence of the respiratory symptoms. So if you see here, cases without symptoms at time of testing. So they came to hospital, they tested them, the patient didn't have respiratory symptoms. Delta, 16.4%. We can call them asymptomatic. Omicron, 9.45%. Cases tested in outpatient settings without symptom at time of testing. So cases without symptom at time of testing, cases tested in outpatient setting without symptoms at time of testing seem the same thing. So 16.4 and 9.4. Cases tested in hospital without symptoms at time of testing, 3. What is this? Adjusted hazard ratio were not estimated due to limited data. So Delta was 50%, I believe, and Omicron 28.6%, half. So then these are the dispositions, and I think that is it. Oh, there's one more. Demographic and clinical characteristics of all cases of Omicron or Delta infection, regardless of test setting. And again, you can read this one. Vaccination is interesting. And I went over some of that before as well. So this is the data. To me, this actually once again um, confirms that there is a reduction in severity, and that is not just because of the um, protection. You are seeing that and if you read the document, they say the severity is reduced for all. So let me see if I can open up that document here. Um, they said, if I go to the top, number one, they said increase in SARS-CoV-2 infections following emergence of the Omicron variant have not been associated with parallel increase in hospitalizations and deaths in same proportion experienced during previous waves. So they are saying there is a decoupling happening. That's one. Second, sorry. I think it is in the, either it's in the discussion. I think this is the one. Reductions in disease severity associated with Omicron variant infections were evident among both vaccinated and unvaccinated patients, and among those with or without documented previous SARS-CoV-2 infection. So everyone had a reduced severity. Some more reduced than others, but everyone had a reduced severity. That means the community's protection is in its place. But let's say somebody who's unvaccinated, you can't say they're protected by vaccine. They also had reduced severity. Who's contributing there? The virus. And I don't think we have reached herd immunity to say that unvaccinated are protected because of the herd immunity. So good data. I would request you to look at it as well. It's a good, fun study. Came out yesterday, so hot off the press. Now there is one more talk I want to do, and I'll see if I can prepare before the 6 o'clock talk, and that is the SARS-CoV-2 or this current pandemic status compared to flu. So has this virus reached a point where um, the death toll is almost the same or not? The only thing is, I understand that in flu, mostly the people in advanced age are more affected. This one can affect any age, but still, I think that is an interesting data point to look at. So, with this, thank you very much for being here. My apologies for being slightly congested. Um, I hope I recover from here instead of becoming worse. And please like, subscribe, and share. The easiest thing for you to do is like. And then, if you would like to support this work as well, there are links in the description. You can buy me a coffee, or you can use PayPal, or you can become a patron. Thank you very much. I might appear once more before 6 o'clock. Have a good day.